On the morning of May 14th, 1993, a driver in Eastern Europe climbed into one of the biggest machines on Earth and started what should have been a normal run out of an iron ore quarry. A little later, the road under him disappeared. The ground broke open, the truck tilted, the sky vanished behind a wall of dust and rock. And then, a machine weighing hundreds of tons was gone. No one could see the cabin, no one could hear the driver, and no one knew if the man inside had died in the collapse or was still trapped somewhere under the wreckage. What followed was not just a mining accident. It was a race against time, against stone, and against the terrible possibility that rescuers were already too late. Because when a road collapses beneath a fully loaded mining truck, there is usually no second chance. And yet, what happened in that quarry would be remembered for decades, not only because of the size of the machine, and not only because of the violence of the collapse, but because the truth about the man inside was far more unbelievable than anyone on that site dared to hope. This is the story of BelAZ 75, of the day the Earth swallowed a giant, and of the driver whose fate remained unknown until the very end. May 14th, 1993 began like hundreds of other mornings at the Northern Iron Quarry. Before sunrise, lights from service vehicles moved slowly along the terraces of the pit. From above, the quarry looked like a carved wound in the earth, descending in giant steps toward its lower levels. Trucks crawled along spiral roads, excavators bit into the rock wall. Bulldozers pushed loose rubble away from the loading zones. Everything was loud, everything was dusty, everything was routine. At around 5:30 in the morning, operators began checking in for the first shift. Mechanics moved from one machine to another, inspecting hoses, tires, brakes, lights, hydraulic lines, and fuel systems. Dispatchers tested the radios. Foremen reviewed the haul routes for the day. Among the machines waiting near the loading area stood BelAZ Unit 75. It was one of the giants of the quarry, a mining dump truck so large that from far away it barely looked real. Its tires were taller than a grown man. Its steel bed could carry a crushing load of ore. When fully loaded, the machine and its cargo together weighed close to 800 tons. At the bottom of a quarry, scale plays tricks on the eye. A truck like that can look almost calm from a distance, as if it is moving slowly and without effort. But when you stand next to it, the illusion disappears. The ladder is steep. The body towers over you. The suspension components are huge. Every part of the machine reminds you that this is not an ordinary vehicle. It is moving mass, steel, fuel, heat, and force. That morning, the man assigned to Unit 75 was Oleksiy Kovalenko. He was 45 years old and had spent more than 2 decades working around heavy machinery. He was not the kind of operator who needed to prove anything. By that point, the job lived in his hands and eyes. He knew how a loaded truck should sound. He knew how the steering should feel on dry gravel, on damp rock, on fresh cuts, and on older roads. He knew the small warning signs that less experienced drivers sometimes missed. To most people, the BelAZ was a monster. To Oleksiy, it was a system he understood. He climbed the ladder, entered the cab, and started the routine he had performed countless times before. Gauges, pressure, hydraulic systems, radio, brake response. Nothing unusual showed on the panel. Nothing in the sound of the engines suggested trouble. A short radio exchange with dispatch confirmed his route. Then he rolled toward the loading point. An excavator waited there with bucket after bucket of iron ore. The first load crashed into the bed with a deep metallic shock. Then the second. Then the third. Dust rose around the truck. The suspension settled lower under the weight. The excavator operator kept working with a steady rhythm, and with each pass, the BelAZ grew heavier, more powerful, and more dangerous if anything went wrong. When loading was complete, Unit 75 was carrying roughly 450 tons of ore. Oleksiy engaged the transmission. The engines answered with a low, powerful roar, and the truck began the long climb up the spiral haul road toward the surface. Under normal conditions, it was an ordinary part of the shift. The route was familiar. The speed was low. The procedure was simple. Load at the bottom, climb, unload, repeat. But that morning, conditions beneath the road were no longer normal. During the night, a heavy rain had passed over the region. On the surface, nothing looked dramatic by morning. The roads were usable. The sky had cleared. Work had begun on time. But underground, water had moved into fractured limestone and hidden cavities below parts of the haul route. Most of it drained away. Some of it did not. Deep below the road, pressure had started building where no driver could see it, and no one standing above could feel it. The road still looked solid, but inside the ground something had begun to change. Oleksiy guided the truck upward at normal speed for a machine of that size, around 15 kilometers per hour. To one side was the rock wall of the quarry. To the other was the open drop toward the lower levels. The path was wide enough when everything was stable, but it was not a place where anyone wanted surprises. For the first part of the climb, nothing seemed wrong. The engines pulled evenly. The steering felt heavy but normal. The load sat where it should. Then Oleksiy noticed a vibration. Not violent, not obvious, just wrong. It came through the steering wheel first, then faintly through the cab floor. It did not match the rhythm of the engine. It was subtle enough that some drivers might have ignored it. Oleksiy did not ignore it. He glanced at the instrument panel. Oil pressure looked good. Hydraulics looked good. Engine temperature was normal. No warning light gave him an answer. Still, the vibration remained. Behind the truck, a thin line of dust rose from the road. But it did not move like ordinary dust thrown up by tires. It seemed to come from the ground itself. Straight up, as if the earth beneath the road was breathing. Several hundred meters away, inside the quarry control building, engineers monitored routine readings from stability equipment and other systems used to watch conditions in the pit. Most values looked normal. Then one sensor beneath part of the haul route began to spike. One reading jumped, then another, then another. An engineer leaned closer to the screen. Something underground was shifting. Before anyone could make sense of it, the situation on the road changed. Oleksiy felt the truck move, not forward, not sideways, down. At first it was only a slight dip, as if one side had rolled over softer material. He eased off the throttle, tightened his grip on the wheel, and in that strange, suspended second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the sound came. A deep, cracking roar from beneath the road. Not like gravel, not like a tire blowout, not like steel. It sounded like thunder trapped underground. The section of haul road beneath BelAZ 75 began to slide. Not crumble in small pieces, not break cleanly. Slide. A mass of wet soil, fractured rock, and gravel started moving toward the open pit below. At first, the movement was slow enough to understand. Then it accelerated. Oleksiy knew immediately what was happening. The road itself was collapsing, and his truck, loaded to an enormous weight, was sitting directly on top of it. He had seconds, no more than that. He tried to steer toward remaining ground. He hit the brakes. The engine strained. But there are moments when skill is no longer enough, because the machine is no longer fighting the road. It is fighting gravity, momentum, and the failure of the earth beneath it. The front of the truck dipped harder. The right side dropped. The whole machine tilted. Inside the cab, the world suddenly lost its normal direction. The windshield no longer framed a road. It framed dust, open space, and falling stone. Loose objects slammed through the cabin. The massive body of the truck twisted as thousands of kilograms of force shifted through the frame. Then one side of the tires lifted clear, and the BelAZ began to roll. The impact was enormous. Steel smashed against rock. The ore in the bed surged and spilled, turning into its own avalanche. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. Dust exploded upwards so fast that it swallowed the scene. From other parts of the quarry, workers saw the giant truck disappear inside a moving cloud of earth and debris. Some heard the crash. Others only saw the dust wall rising over the road where the BelAZ had been moments earlier. Then came silence. Not perfect silence. There was still falling rubble. There was still the shifting grind of rock settling into a new position. But compared to the seconds before, it felt like the quarry had stopped breathing. Radio traffic erupted. Dispatch called Unit 75. Another operator called Unit 75. A supervisor called Oleksiy by name. No answer came back. The first people to approach the collapse area could not even see where the truck had landed. The road section had partly sheared away. Ore, mud, rock, and broken debris were piled across the slope below. Visibility was poor. Dust filled the air. Small stones still rolled down from above. No one knew if the cabin had been crushed flat. No one knew if the driver had been thrown out. No one knew if anyone inside could still be alive. What they did know was simple. If Oleksiy had survived the roll, he was now trapped inside one of the heaviest damaged machines in the quarry, buried under unstable material, with every minute making the chances worse. Rescue teams were called immediately. Operations near the collapse zone were shut down. Engineers and supervisors tried to judge whether another slide might follow. No one wanted to send men into a second collapse. No one wanted to wait. That is the cruel thing about disasters like this. Caution saves lives. Delay costs them. And in the middle of both stands a trapped human being whose condition no one can confirm. Hours passed in a kind of terrible focus. Heavy equipment was repositioned. Routes were secured. The area was checked for further instability. Rescuers worked their way towards the buried truck as carefully as possible, because one bad move could shift the wreckage and crush whatever space might still exist inside the cabin. At last, they found it. BelAZ 75 lay on its side, partly buried beneath rock and spilled ore. The frame was twisted. Parts of the body had been crushed and bent out of shape. Dust covered everything. The machine that had looked almost indestructible at dawn now looked beaten, broken, and half consumed by the slope. The biggest question remained unanswered. What had happened to the driver? The rescue team moved closer. They examined the position of the cab. They listened. They called out. No immediate response came. That silence pressed on everyone standing there. If there was survivable space inside, it would be because the cab had held. If the cab had failed, the mission was already no longer a rescue. The BelAZ was equipped with a reinforced operator structure designed to protect the driver in severe conditions. In ordinary language, it was the strongest part of the truck around the human being inside it. But this had been no ordinary accident. The truck had rolled, slammed into rock, and been buried under massive weight. No one could trust hope too easily. Rescuers brought hydraulic tools. Cranes were positioned. Every movement was slow and controlled. They cut through damaged sections of metal. They cleared debris away from the cab. They searched for a safe angle to open access without causing the wreck to shift. Diesel and hydraulic fluid increased the danger. Loose rock still threatened to move. Time kept passing, and still nobody outside could say for certain whether Oleksiy was dead or alive. Then, after long hours that felt much longer than the clock, the answer finally came. He was alive. Against all expectations, Oleksiy Kovalenko had survived inside that destroyed truck. The cab had not fully collapsed. The reinforced safety structure had held just enough. The truck had rolled, the road had failed, and tons of rock had come down around him, but a survivable space remained inside the twisted steel. He was badly injured. He had cuts, bruises, broken bones, and the shock of hours spent trapped in darkness, dust, heat, and pain. But he was conscious. He had not been crushed. He had stayed alive long enough for rescuers to reach him. Nearly 6 hours after the collapse, using hydraulic cutters and lifting equipment, the rescue team finally freed him from the wreckage. Men who had spent those hours preparing themselves for the worst watched him come out alive, covered in dust, shaking, exhausted, but alive. Only then could the people around him fully understand what they were looking at. The road had vanished. The ore from the truck was scattered below. The BelAZ itself was ruined and half buried. And yet the driver, the one person who should have had the least chance, had somehow made it through. Later investigation showed what had happened under the road. Water had filled hidden cavities in limestone beneath that section of the quarry. The pressure weakened the ground from below. Then the weight of a fully loaded truck triggered a sudden slide. It was a chain of conditions almost impossible to see in time from the surface. The collapse was not caused by reckless driving. It was not caused by some simple mistake in the cab. It was a brutal combination of geology, water, weight, and timing. In the months that followed, the quarry changed. Routes were adjusted, monitoring was improved. The accident became a lesson written not in paperwork alone, but in memory. Workers remembered where they had been when the road gave way. They remembered the dust. They remembered the silence after the crash. And they remembered the moment they learned the driver was still alive. The truck itself was never fully recovered. The damage, the position, and the risk of further instability left much of BelAZ 75 where it had fallen and been buried. Over time, rock and soil hid more of it. The quarry moved on, but not completely. The place where the giant disappeared remained part warning, part legend. Oleksiy did what few people could imagine doing after such a disaster. He returned to work. Not immediately, not carelessly. But after recovery, he climbed back into heavy machinery again. That does not mean he forgot what happened. It means he understood better than anyone both the power of the machines and the power of the ground beneath them. Years passed, then decades, and the story remained in the memory of the mine. A giant truck swallowed by the earth, a driver whose fate seemed sealed, a rescue that succeeded when almost no one believed it could. Then, in 2025, the old story returned in a new way. During survey work in the long closed section of the northern quarry, engineers using ground-penetrating radar detected a huge buried shape under layers of rock and hardened soil. The pattern was too clean to be natural, too large to be ordinary equipment. As the scans became clearer, the outline appeared. 8 massive wheels, a long rectangular body. A mining truck. It was BelAZ 75, the same truck that had vanished in the 1993 collapse. Buried for more than 3 decades, the machine was found again beneath the quarry floor, crushed, entombed, and preserved well enough to be recognized. Not with the remains of a dead driver inside, as rumors sometimes imagine such stories should end, but as a silent witness to a disaster from which its operator had already escaped with his life. That final discovery changed the feeling of the story, because the truck had stayed behind. The machine had been swallowed, but the man had not. And maybe that is why people kept telling the story. Not because steel lost to stone. That happens. Not because a giant machine disappeared. That alone would have been enough to shock anyone who worked in mining. But because, inside one of the worst possible moments, in a place where hope should have ended, it did not. A road collapsed. A truck rolled into disaster. A rescue team dug toward a cab, not knowing if they were trying to save a life or recover a body. And somehow, unbelievably, they reached a man who was still there, still breathing, still alive. That is what made the story last. Not only the size of the truck, not only the violence of the collapse, but the fact that the truth, when it finally came, was stronger than the fear that came before it. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe for more true, powerful stories.